The massive ship blocked out the stars as it moved through space. The Vorthok Empire's war vessel was the size of a small moon, its dark metal surface covered in strange symbols that glowed with purple light. Inside the ship's command center, tall alien figures stood around a holographic display showing a small blue planet. "Earth has fallen," announced General Vex, his voice echoing through the chamber. The Vorthok were twice as tall as humans, with pale gray skin and large black eyes that seemed to look right through you. Their most frightening feature was not their appearance, their ability to control minds with just a thought. Emperor Thane sat on his throne made of living metal that moved and shifted like liquid. The throne was connected to every ship in his fleet through invisible mental links. He could feel the thoughts and emotions of his soldiers across the galaxy. For 3,000 years, his empire had grown stronger by conquering world after world. Earth was just another prize. "Me, the human engineer?" the Emperor commanded. 2 Vorthok soldiers dragged a human woman into the throne room. Her name was Yuki, and she had been the chief engineer at Earth's main defense station. Her uniform was torn and dirty, but her eyes showed no fear. She looked around the room, taking in every detail she could see. The Emperor leaned forward on his throne. "You fought well, human. Your people showed more resistance than most species we conquer. But now, Earth belongs to us." Yuki said nothing. She had seen her home planet burn from space as the Vorthok ships destroyed city after city. Millions of humans were dead, and the survivors were being loaded onto transport ships like cattle. "Your technical knowledge is valuable," the Emperor continued. "You will work for us now. Help us understand human technology, and you will live. Refuse, and you will join your dead friends." "I understand," Yuki replied quietly. The Emperor smiled, showing sharp teeth. "Good. Take her to the engineering section. Put her to work on the communication systems." As the guards led her away, Yuki noticed something important. The Vortex. Technology was different from anything humans had built. Their ships, weapons, and computers all worked through mental connections. The aliens used their minds to control their machines, linking their thoughts directly to their technology. She walked through long corridors filled with strange equipment. Everything hummed with energy that felt alive. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. This was the neural web, the system that connected every part of the Vorthok Empire across the galaxy. In the engineering section, Yuki met other prisoners. There was Day, a former military strategist from Earth who had been assigned to work on food production systems. There was also Hyun, a naval officer who was now forced to help build new Vorthok ships. All of them were humans who had been captured because their skills were useful to the Empire. "They think we are stupid animals," Day whispered to Yuki when the guards were not watching. "So they treat us like we cannot think for ourselves." Yuki nodded. She'd already noticed this. The Vorthok believed that only they were truly intelligent. They saw other species as clever pets at best. This attitude made them careless around their prisoners. The workstation they gave, Yuki was connected to a massive computer system that controlled communications across hundreds of worlds. The Vorthok supervisor, a tall female named Kess, explained what Yuki was supposed to do. "You will maintain the relay systems," Kess said in broken human language. "Fix problems when they happen. The work is simple enough for your kind." Yuki bowed her head as if accepting her fate. "Yes, I understand." But as she began to work, Yuki was actually studying the system. She learned that the neural web was like a giant brain connecting all Vorthok technology. Every ship, every weapon, every communication device was part of this network. The aliens controlled it all through their mental powers. During her first week, Yuki discovered something that made her heart race with excitement. The entire system depended on psychic harmony. All the Vorthok minds had to work together smoothly. For their technology to function properly, if something disrupted this harmony, it could affect the entire network. She began to form a plan. It was dangerous and would take time, but it might be the only way to fight back against the Empire. The Vorthok had made one crucial mistake. They had given her access to their most important systems because they thought she was too primitive to understand how they worked Every day, Yuki worked on the communication relays. She fixed problems and maintained the equipment, just as she was told to do. But she also began to make tiny changes to the system's programming. The changes were so small that the Vorthak's automated monitoring systems could not detect them. It was like a virus entering a computer, spreading slowly through the network. Each small change she made was designed to create tiny disruptions in the psychic connections that held the Empire together. By themselves, these disruptions were harmless. But Yuki planned to let them build up over time until they became something much more dangerous, at night in the cramped quarters where the human prisoners were kept. Yuki began to share her plan with the others. She had to be very careful. The Vorthok could read minds if they tried hard enough, so she communicated through small gestures and coded words. We cannot fight them with guns or ships, she told Day and Han. But we can fight them with their own technology. They have given us access to their most important systems because they think we are too stupid to use them against them. Day's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to attack the neural web? Yes, Yuki whispered. But we have to be patient. We have to work together. And we have to be very careful not to let them discover what we are doing. As the days passed, more human prisoners were brought to the ship. Each one was given a job based on their skills. Yuki began to build a network of resistance among the humans. They communicated through the maintenance systems, leaving coded messages that looked like routine repair notes. The Vorthok never suspected that their slaves were planning something. They were too proud and too confident in their power to imagine that primitive humans could threaten their mighty empire. This arrogance would be their downfall. YUKI continued her work, making small changes to the neural web day by day. She was like a surgeon cutting tiny holes in a giant balloon. Each cut was too small to notice, but together they would eventually cause the entire structure to collapse. The Vorthok Empire had stood tall for 3,000 years, crushing every species that opposed them. But now, for the first time, they faced an enemy who fought not with weapons or armies, but with patience, intelligence, and determination. And they had no idea that their destruction had already begun. 3 months had passed since Yuki began her work in the engineering section. The Vorthok ship continued its journey through space, stopping at different worlds to collect resources and slaves. Each day brought new horrors as the Empire expanded. Its reach across the galaxy. YUKI had settled into a routine that made her captors believe she was a broken, obedient prisoner. Every morning, she would report to her workstation and begin maintaining the communication systems. She spoke only when spoken to and kept her head down when Vorthok supervisors walked by. But behind this mask of submission, Yuki was learning everything she could about the Empire's technology. She had discovered that the neural web was even more complex than she had first realized. It was not just a communication system, it was the nervous system of the entire Vorthok. Civilization, every ship in their fleet was connected to the network. Every weapon, every shield, every life support system depended on the psychic links that connected Vorthok minds across the galaxy. The aliens could control their technology from anywhere in the Empire, instantly sending commands to ships that were light years away. This incredible power came with a terrible weakness. The system required perfect harmony between all connected minds. If too many Vorthok experienced mental stress at the same time, it could disrupt the entire network. Yuki had begun to understand how she could use this weakness against them. Her small changes to the communication systems were spreading through the network like a slow-acting poison. Each modification was designed to create tiny amounts of psychic static mental noise that would interfere with the Vorthok's ability to maintain their connections. The changes were so subtle that even the Empire's most advanced monitoring systems could not detect them. They looked like normal variations in the network's operation. But Yuki knew that when enough of these small disruptions accumulated, they would create something much more dangerous. During her work shifts, Yuki began to pay close attention to the other human prisoners. She watched how they moved, how they worked, and how they interacted with their captors. Slowly, she began to identify those who might be willing to join her. Resistance. Day had been assigned to work in the food production systems. This gave him access to the ship's life support networks, which were also connected to the neural web. During their brief encounters in the prisoner quarters, Yuki began to teach him about the small changes she was making. Gashika, you want me to do that? Same thing to the food systems? Day asked quietly one night. Yes, but you must be very careful, Yuki replied. The changes have to be so small that their computers think they are normal fluctuations. If they discover what we are doing, they will kill us all. Day nodded. He understood the risk, but he also understood that this might be their only chance. To fight back, the next day, he began making his own modifications to the systems. His job was to help install the power systems that would connect new ships to the neural web. This position gave him access to the most critical parts of the Empire's technology. When Yuki explained her plan to him, Heian's face grew serious. We do this wrong. We could kill everyone on this ship, including ourselves. If we do nothing, we will remain slaves forever, Yuki replied. And our people on Earth will suffer under Vorthok rule. Sometimes the only choice is between certain death and possible freedom. Heian thought about this for a long moment. Then he nodded. Tell me what you need me to do. Over the following weeks, Yuki began to build a network of human resistance throughout the ship. She identified prisoners who had access to critical systems and slowly recruited them to her cause. Each person was given specific instructions about what changes to make and when to make them. The most important part of the plan was timing. All the modifications had to reach critical mass at the same time. If one part of the network was disrupted before the others were ready, the Vorthok would have time to adapt and stop the attack. YUKI used the maintenance systems to send coded messages to her allies. She would leave instructions hidden in routine repair reports, disguised as technical notes that only another engineer would understand. Yuki noticed small signs that her sabotage was beginning to work. Sometimes the communication systems would experience brief glitches. A message might be delayed by a few seconds, or a connection might flicker for a moment before stabilizing. The Vorthok engineers who supervised the systems noticed these problems, but they dismissed them as normal wear and tear. Their technology was so advanced that they had forgotten how to troubleshoot basic problems. They relied entirely on their psychic abilities to control their machines. This overconfidence was exactly what Yuki had been counting on. The Vorthok had become so dependent on their mental powers that they had lost the ability to think like engineers. They could not imagine that their technology might be vulnerable to conventional attacks. Meanwhile, Yuki learned more about the Empire's structure from conversations she overheard between her captors. The Vorthok had conquered thousands of worlds, enslaving entire species and forcing them to work in mines, factories, and farms. Earth was just the latest addition to their vast collection of dominated worlds. The Emperor ruled from the capital ship, but his power extended across 17 galaxy clusters through the neural web. He could feel the thoughts and emotions of every Vorthok in the Empire. If anything threatened his rule, he would know about it instantly. This knowledge made Yuki's plan even more dangerous. When she finally activated her sabotage, she would be attacking not just the technology, but the Emperor himself. The disruption would cause him tremendous pain and might even drive him insane. But Yuki felt no sympathy for the creature who had ordered the destruction of her world. She had seen the ruins of Earth's cities from space. She had watched as Vorthok soldiers herded human children onto transport ships. The Emperor deserved whatever suffering her plan would cause him. As her network of resistance grew, Yuki began to receive information from humans working on other ships in the fleet. The Vorthok had made the same mistake everywhere they had given their slaves. Access to critical systems, because they believed humans were too primitive to understand how to use them. On cargo ships, human prisoners were modifying the systems that controlled artificial gravity and life support. On patrol vessels, they were tampering with the navigation computers. On the massive factory ships, they're introducing flaws into the manufacturing processes that would cause new equipment to fail at critical moments. Each group of resistors was working on their own part of the plan, but they were all connected through Yuki's communication network. She had become the central coordinator of a galaxy-wide rebellion. Using the Empire's own technology to organize the resistance, the Vorthok continued to see their human slaves as simple creatures who could perform basic tasks, but lacked the intelligence for complex thinking. They had no idea that these primitive beings were planning the most sophisticated attack in galactic history. Yuki's modifications to the neural web were now reaching critical levels. The psychic static was building up throughout the network, creating stress in the minds of Vorthok operators across the Empire. But the aliens attributed these problems to the normal challenges of managing such a vast civilization soon. Yuki knew the accumulated damage would reach a tipping point. When that happened, the neural web would collapse, taking the entire Vorthok Empire with it. The countdown to freedom had begun. 6 months had passed since Yuki first began her quiet war against the Vorthok Empire. The massive capital ship had visited 12 different star systems, each time adding more slaves and resources to the Emperor's collection. But something was changing in the depths of space, something the Vorthok could not yet see. The neural web was beginning to show signs of strain. What had started as tiny glitches in the communication systems was now spreading to other parts of the network.
Navigation.
Computers would sometimes give incorrect readings. Power systems would flicker for brief moments. Weapons would take longer to charge than they should. The Vorthok engineers were growing frustrated with these problems, but they still could not identify the source. Their diagnostic systems showed that everything was working normally. The issues seemed to be random, appearing in different parts of the network without any clear pattern. "The humans are performing adequately," reported Supervisor Kess during the daily briefing. "Productivity in the engineering section has remained stable. The communication relays are functioning within normal parameters." Emperor Thane nodded from his throne. His connection to the neural web allowed him to feel the pulse of his empire, but lately that pulse had been irregular. Sometimes he would experience brief moments of mental static, like interference on an old radio. His advisors assured him that this was normal stress from managing such a vast civilization. In the engineering section, Yuki continued her work with the patience of someone who understood that victory would take time. Each day, she made small additions to her sabotage, carefully building toward the moment. When everything would collapse at once, she had learned to read the subtle signs in the system that showed her modifications were working. The response time for certain commands was getting slower. The error correction systems were working harder to maintain connections. The psychic harmony that held the network together was beginning to crack, but Yuki's most important achievement was the resistance network she had built among the human prisoners. What had started as a small group of engineers had grown into a galaxy-wide organization of saboteurs. Day had made contact with humans working on 17 different ships in the fleet. Each group had been given specific instructions about what systems to target and when to activate their modifications. The timing had to be perfect. If one part of the network failed before the others were ready, the Vorthok would have time to adapt. "The food production systems are ready," Day reported during one of their secret meetings. "When you give the signal, we can disrupt the nutritional processors on every ship in the fleet. The Vorthok will start experiencing physical weakness." Within hours, Yuan had been equally successful in his sabotage efforts. His position in the shipyards had given him access to the power distribution systems of newly constructed vessels. He had been introducing subtle flaws that would cause catastrophic failures when activated. "I have modified the power cores on 43 ships," he whispered to Yuki. "When the signal comes, they will overload and shut down. The ships will lose life support, weapons, and shields all at once." But the most important part of Yuki's plan was the network of human slaves working throughout the Empire. Through coded messages hidden in maintenance reports, she had been able to coordinate resistance activities on hundreds of worlds. On the mining planet Kepler-4 for Tabi, men slaves had been modifying the extraction equipment that harvested rare minerals. For the Vorthok, when activated, these modifications would cause the mining systems to malfunction, disrupting the flow of resources to the Empire's factories. On the agricultural world, Galactic 67C, human farmers had been introducing genetic modifications to the crops that fed the Vorthok population. These changes would cause the plants to produce toxins that would weaken the aliens' psychic abilities. On the factory world Proxima B, human workers had been sabotaging the production lines that built Vorthok weapons and ships. When the time came, these facilities would produce equipment that would fail at critical moments. Each world had its own group of human resistance fighters, all coordinated through Yuki's communication network. The Vorthok had unknowingly created the perfect conditions for their own destruction. By spreading human slaves throughout their empire, the aliens' arrogance had blinded them to the danger. They continued to see humans as simple creatures who could follow orders but lacked the intelligence for complex planning. They had no idea that their slaves were more organized and determined than any enemy they had ever faced. Yuki had also been studying the psychology of her captors. She had learned that the Vorthok's psychic abilities made them extremely sensitive to mental stress. Their minds were connected to each other and to their technology in ways that made them powerful but also vulnerable. If she could create enough disruption in the neural web, it would cause psychological trauma to every Vorthok. Connected to the system, the aliens would experience confusion, fear, and panic as their mental links were severed. In their weakened state, they would be unable to coordinate their forces or maintain control over their slaves. The plan was dangerous because it would affect every part of the empire simultaneously. Billions of beings would be caught in the chaos that followed the network's collapse. But Yuki had concluded that this was the only way to ensure that the Vorthok could never rebuild their empire. As the months passed, Yuki began to notice changes in the behavior of her captors. The Vorthok supervisors were becoming more irritable and less focused. They would sometimes give contradictory orders or forget important tasks. The mental static in the neural web was beginning to affect their ability to think clearly. Emperor Thane was experiencing these problems more intensely than his subjects. As the central node of the network, he was feeling every disruption that occurred anywhere in the empire. His advisors were concerned about his increasing erratic behavior, but they attributed it to the stress of ruling such a vast civilization. The outer colonies are reporting communication difficulties. General Vex informed the Emperor during a strategy meeting. Response times are slower than usual, and some systems are experiencing intermittent failures. The Emperor waved dismissively. These are minor problems. The Empire has survived far worse challenges. Increase the number of technical crews working on the systems. But Yuki knew that no amount of technical crews could solve the problem. The disruptions were not caused by equipment failures, but by the accumulated damage she had been introducing. To the network's core programming, the system was slowly poisoning itself from within. The resistance network had grown to include thousands of humans across the galaxy. Each person had been given specific instructions about their role in the final attack. Some would disrupt power systems, others would interfere with communications, still others would sabotage weapons and shields. The beauty of the plan was that it used the Empire's own technology against itself. The neural web that gave the Vorthok their power would become the weapon that destroyed them. Every connection, every link, every psychic bond would carry the disruption to every corner of their civilization. YUK, I had set the activation date for the following month. By then, her modifications would have spread throughout the entire network, and all the resistance cells would be in position. The attack would begin simultaneously on every world in the Empire. Giving the Vorthok no time to respond or adapt, she spent her final weeks of preparation reviewing every detail of the plan. The timing had to be perfect. The coordination had to be flawless. One mistake could doom not just the resistance, but every human slave in the galaxy. As she worked at her station, maintaining the communication systems that would soon carry the signal for their own destruction, Yuki felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The fate of countless worlds depended on her plan working exactly as designed. The Vorthok Empire had stood for 3,000 years, growing stronger with each world they conquered. But they had made one fatal mistake they had underestimated: the intelligence and determination of the species they had enslaved. Soon, they would learn that even the mightiest empire could fall when its foundation was built on the suffering of others. The day of reckoning arrived with no fanfare. To the Vorthok, it seemed like any other day in their 3,000-year reign. The Emperor sat on his throne, reviewing reports from distant worlds. His generals planned new conquests. His engineers maintained the vast network that held their civilization together. But in the depths of space, on countless ships and worlds, Human slaves were preparing for the most coordinated attack in galactic history. At exactly 0800 hours, Galactic Standard Time, Yuki sent the signal that would change everything. The activation began as a simple maintenance command sent through the communication network. To the Vorthok monitoring systems, it looked like routine. System updates being distributed across the Empire. But this innocent-looking signal carried within it the keys to unlock all the sabotage that had been building for months. On the Emperor's capital ship, Yuki felt her heart racing as she entered the final command sequence. Around her, Vorthok supervisors continued their normal duties, unaware that their world was about to end. The communication array hummed with energy as it prepared to send the signal to every corner of the Empire. The cascade began instantly. As the activation signal spread through the neural web, it triggered all the modifications that Yuki and her resistance network had been secretly installing. What had seemed like minor glitches and random errors suddenly revealed themselves as parts of a devastating weapon. Emperor Thane was the first to feel the effects. His connection to the neural web made him the most vulnerable to the psychic disruption that was now flooding the network. He screamed as his mind was suddenly filled with chaotic static, his carefully maintained mental links to his empire dissolving into painful noise. "What is happening?" he shouted, gripping the arms of his throne as waves of mental agony washed over him. His advisors rushed to help him, but they were experiencing their own problems. The psychic harmony that allowed the Vorthok to coordinate their thoughts was breaking down. Individual minds that had been connected for centuries were suddenly isolated and confused. Throughout the ship, Vorthok crew members began to collapse as their mental abilities failed them. Their technology, which depended on psychic control, started to malfunction. Lights flickered, computer systems crashed. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, but the capital ship was just the beginning. Disruption was spreading through the neural web at the speed of light, reaching every part of the Empire simultaneously. On worlds thousands of light years away, the same chaos was erupting. High-end sabotage of the power systems activated exactly as planned. On 43 ships throughout the fleet, power cores began to overload. The Vorthok engineers tried to shut down the failing systems, but their psychic abilities were too disrupted to control their own technology. The first ship to lose power was a patrol vessel on the outer edge of the system. Its lights went out, its shields collapsed, and its weapons went offline. The crew found themselves trapped in a powerless hull, drifting helplessly through space. More ships followed. The massive factory vessels that produced Vorthok weapons and equipment shut down as their power systems failed. The cargo ships carrying resources from conquered worlds found themselves unable to navigate or communicate. The warships that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia became floating tombs. On the agricultural world Gli 667c, the genetic modifications that human farmers had introduced to the crops began to take effect. The plants that fed the Vorthok population started producing toxins that attacked the aliens' nervous systems. Within hours, Vorthok colonists were falling ill, their psychic abilities weakening as the poisons spread through their bodies. The mining operations on KEPLER 442 ground to a halt as the extraction equipment malfunctioned. The rare minerals that powered the Empire's technology could no longer be harvested. The flow of resources that sustained the Vorthok civilization was cut off. On the factory world Proximal B, the production lines that built Vorthok weapons began producing defective equipment. Laser rifles that would explode when fired. Shield generators that would fail at critical moments. Ships that would break apart during their first flight. But the most devastating effect was on the Vorthok themselves. As the neural web collapsed, their psychic abilities began to turn against them. The mental connections that had given them power over other species now became sources of unbearable pain. Across the Empire, Vorthok minds were overwhelmed by the chaos flooding through their mental network. Some aliens went insane from the psychic feedback. Others fell into comas as their brains shut down to protect themselves from the mental assault. The Emperor was suffering the worst of all. As the central node of the network, he was receiving the full force of the disruption. Screams echoed through the throne room as his mind was torn apart by the collapsing system he had once controlled. "Stop this," he shouted at his advisors. Fix the network. Restore the connections. But his advisors were barely conscious themselves. The psychic static was so intense that they could barely think, let alone coordinate a response to the crisis. The Empire's command structure was collapsing, along with its technology. Throughout the galaxy, the species that had been enslaved by the Vorthok began to realize what was happening. On Earth, the orbital defense platforms that had suppressed human resistance suddenly went dark. The Vorthok soldiers who had occupied major cities found themselves unable to coordinate their forces. General Suber, one of the few surviving Earth's military leaders, saw the opportunity and acted quickly. Within hours, human resistance fighters were emerging from hiding to attack the confused and weakened Vorthok forces. The aliens who had seemed invincible just days before were now helpless without their technology and psychic powers. The same uprising was happening on hundreds of worlds. Species that had been conquered decades or centuries ago were suddenly free to fight back against their oppressors. The Vorthok, without their mental dominance and technological superiority, were no match for the combined fury of their former slaves. On the capital ship, Yuki watched the chaos unfold around her. The Vorthok supervisors who had treated her like an animal were now crawling on the floor, clutching their heads in agony. The communication systems she had sabotaged were sending error messages across the galaxy, spreading the disruption to every corner of the Empire. She felt no satisfaction in their suffering. Ow! Only a grim determination to see the plan through to its conclusion. The Vorthok had shown no mercy when they destroyed Earth. They deserved none in return. Day's sabotage of the food production systems was also taking effect. The nutritional processors that fed the Vorthok population were beginning to produce contaminated food. The aliens who consumed it would become sick and weak, further reducing their ability to maintain control over their empire. The timing of the attack had been perfect. By striking simultaneously across the galaxy, the resistance had prevented the Vorthok from adapting to the threat. There was no time to develop countermeasures or reorganize their forces. The Empire was collapsing too quickly for any coordinated response. As the hours passed, the situation grew worse for the Vorthok. Their ships were powerless and drifting. Their weapons were useless. Their communication systems were offline. Importantly, their psychic abilities were gone, leaving them vulnerable to the very species they had enslaved. The neural web that had been the source of their power for 3 millennia was now their greatest weakness. Every connection that had made them strong was now carrying the virus of their destruction. The more connected they had been, the more they suffered from the collapse. Emperor Thane's condition continued to deteriorate. The constant psychic feedback was driving him insane. His advisors tried to disconnect him from the network, but the damage was already done. His mind had been too deeply integrated with the system to survive its collapse. By the end of the first day, the Vorthok Empire was in complete chaos. Their vast civilization had been reduced to scattered groups of powerless aliens, unable to communicate with each other or coordinate their actions. The greatest empire in galactic history had fallen in less than 24 hours. But the collapse was far from over. The disruption would continue to spread and intensify, ensuring that the Vorthok could never rebuild their empire. The galaxy was finally free from their tyranny, but the price of freedom would be counted in the billions of lives lost as their civilization crumbled. 3 days after the collapse began, the Vorthok Empire was completely destroyed. What had taken 3,000 years to build was gone in less than a week. The neural web, once the pride of their civilization, was now a twisted wreckage of broken connections and corrupted data. The aftermath was terrible to witness. Across the galaxy, Vorthok ships drifted powerless through space, their crews dead or dying. The aliens who had once ruled with absolute authority were now helpless refugees, begging for mercy from the species they had enslaved. On the capital ship, Emperor Thane lay dying on his throne of living metal. The psychic feedback from the networks collapse had destroyed his mind, leaving him as an empty shell of his former self. His advisors had fled or committed suicide rather than face the consequences of their empire's fall. YUKA stood in the ruins of the communication center, surrounded by smoking equipment and unconscious Vorthok supervisors, sabotaged or beyond repair, their circuits fused by the massive energy surges that had accompanied the network's collapse. She had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. The Vorthok Empire was gone, and humanity was free. But as she looked around at the destruction, she felt no joy. The price of victory had been higher than anyone had imagined. The collapse of the neural web had affected more than just the Vorthok. Many of the species they had enslaved depended on the Empire's technology for basic survival. Without the communication networks, transport systems, and resource distribution that the Vorthok had provided, entire worlds were now facing starvation. And chaos reports were coming in from across the galaxy of civilizations, collapsing as the infrastructure that supported them disappeared. The Vorthok had been cruel masters, but they had also been the only thing holding their vast interstellar society together. Day found Yuki in the communication center, his face grim with exhaustion and worry. The food production systems had been completely destroyed by his sabotage, leaving the ship's survivors without a reliable source of nutrition. "We need to get off this ship," he said quietly. "The life support systems are failing, and there are not enough escape pods for everyone." Yuki nodded. She had expected this. The sabotage had been designed to destroy the Empire completely, which meant that many of the systems needed for survival would also be damaged. They had known from the beginning that victory would come at a terrible cost. "What about the other prisoners?" she asked. "Hune is organizing evacuations from the ships that still have power. But there are thousands of humans scattered throughout. The fleet and most of the transport systems are offline." The reality of their situation was becoming clear. They had won the war, but surviving the peace would be just as difficult. The galaxy was in chaos, and the former slaves were now responsible for building a new civilization from the ruins of the old one. On Earth, the situation was both better and worse. The Vorthok occupation forces had been defeated, but the damage to the planet was extensive. The major cities had been destroyed during the initial invasion. The infrastructure needed to support the surviving population was in ruins. General Su had taken command of the surviving Earth forces, yet her resources were limited. Most of the planet's military equipment had been destroyed or captured during the Vorthok invasion. The resistance fighters who had emerged from hiding were brave but poorly equipped to deal with the massive challenges facing their world. The most immediate problem was the millions of human prisoners who were scattered throughout the former Empire. Many were trapped on distant worlds, with no way to return home. Others were aboard ships that were now powerless and drifting through space. Rescuing them would require a massive effort that Earth's damaged civilization could barely manage. HFY had become something of a legend among the human survivors. Word of her role in destroying the Empire had spread quickly through the resistance networks, but she found the attention uncomfortable. She had not acted to become a hero, she had acted because there was no other choice, as she worked with Day and Hyen to organize the evacuation of the capital ship. Yuki received a message that changed everything. It came through one of the few communication systems that was still partially functional. Broadcast from a group of Vorthok survivors who had managed to maintain some semblance of organization. The message was from a Vorthok noble named Kreese, one of the few aliens who had opposed the Empire's policies of conquest and slavery. She had been imprisoned by her own people for her beliefs, but the chaos of the collapse had allowed her to escape. To the humans who destroyed our empire. The message began, "I wish to speak with you about the future. Our civilizations are both in ruins. Perhaps we can work together to build something better from what remains." The idea of cooperating with any Vorthok was controversial among the human survivors. Many wanted nothing more than to see the aliens suffer for what they had done to Earth. But Yuki recognized that revenge would not solve the practical problems they faced. "We need to hear what she has to say," Yuki told the other resistance leaders during an emergency meeting. "The galaxy is too big for any one species to control. If we are going to survive, we will need allies." The meeting with Kreese took place on a neutral space station that had somehow survived the Empire's collapse. The Vorthok noble was smaller than most of her kind. We're delaying. I cannot undo the crimes my people committed, Kreese said simply. But I can offer our knowledge and technology to help repair the damage. We know how to build faster-than-light communication systems without the neural web. We understand the agricultural techniques needed to feed entire worlds. We have medical knowledge that could save millions of lives. Yuki studied the alien's face, looking for signs of deception. The Vorthok were known for their ability to manipulate other species. And trust would not come easily. But the practical benefits of cooperation were undeniable. What do you want in return? Yuki asked. Chance for my people to survive, Kreese replied. Most Vorthok are dying without the neural web to support them. We need food, medicine, and shelter. In exchange, we will share everything we know about running an interstellar civilization. The negotiations that followed were difficult and emotional. Many humans wanted the Vorthok to face justice for their crimes. Others argued that cooperation was the only way to prevent the galaxy from descending into permanent chaos. In the end, Yuki's voice proved decisive. She had earned the right to speak for humanity through her actions, and her words carried great weight with the other survivors. We cannot bring back the dead, she said during the final debate. We cannot undo the suffering our people endured. But we can choose what kind of future we build from the ruins of the past. Do we want a galaxy divided by hatred and fear, or one united by the hope of something better? The agreement they reached was imperfect, but it was a beginning. The surviving Vorthok would share their technological knowledge in exchange for protection and basic necessities. War criminals would face justice, but ordinary citizens would be given a chance to prove they could live peacefully alongside other species. As the months passed, this cooperation began to bear fruit. New communication networks were established, using Vorthok technology but human engineering principles. Agricultural worlds were restored using advanced growing techniques. Medical facilities were built that could treat injuries and diseases that had been incurable under the old empire. But the work was slow and difficult. The galaxy was vast, and the damage caused by the empire's collapse was enormous. Many worlds would never fully recover from the chaos. Entire species had been wiped out when their life support systems failed. Yuki found herself in a position she had never wanted, as one of the leaders of the new galactic civilization. Her engineering skills were desperately needed to design the systems that would hold the new society together. But she struggled with the weight of responsibility and the knowledge that her actions had caused so much suffering. You regret what you did? Day asked her one day, as they worked together on designing a new type of communication relay. Why UK? I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary, she said finally. I regret the billions who died when the empire collapsed. But I do not regret freeing our people from slavery. Sometimes the only choice is between certain oppression and uncertain freedom. The new galactic civilization that emerged from the ruins of the Vorthok Empire was very different from what had come before. Instead of one dominant species ruling over all others, it was a confederation of equals. Each world was free to govern itself, but they were connected by trade, agreements, and mutual defense pacts. The technology that made this possible was a hybrid of human and Vorthok knowledge. The new communication systems were faster and more reliable than anything the Empire had possessed, but they did not require psychic abilities to operate. Any species could use them, regardless of their mental capabilities. But the most important change was philosophical. The new civilization was built on the principle that no species had the right to dominate another. This principle was enforced not by law, but by the shared memory of what had happened when one group became too powerful. The collapse of the Vorthok Empire had taught the galaxy a hard lesson about the price of tyranny. It was a lesson that would not be forgotten for many generations to come. 10 years had passed since the fall of the Vorthok Empire, the galaxy. It was a very different place now, shaped by the choices made in those chaotic first months after the collapse. Where once there had been one massive empire ruling through fear and domination,
now there were hundreds of independent worlds, working together through cooperation and trade.
Why UKI stood on the observation deck of New Harmony Station?
Truly international space station, built by the Galactic Confederation. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships from dozens of different species docking and departing. The The station served as both a trading post and a symbol of what the galaxy could achieve when different civilizations worked together. But the path to this peaceful present had not been easy. The early years after the Empire's collapse had been marked by conflict, starvation, and desperate struggles for survival. Many worlds had descended into chaos when their Vorthok-built infrastructure failed. Others had been invaded by opportunistic raiders who saw the power vacuum as a chance to build their own small empires. The human worlds had fared better than most, thanks partly to their experience with independent thinking and partly to the leadership of people like General Su, who had helped organize the rescue efforts for stranded human populations. But even Earth had taken years to recover from the damage caused by the Vorthok. Invasion Yuki's role in the new civilization had evolved over time. She was no longer the desperate engineer hiding sabotage in communication systems. Instead, she had become one of the chief architects of the technology that held the Confederation together. Her designs for faster-than-light communication had made it possible for distant worlds to coordinate their activities without the need for a centralized empire. The irony was not lost on her. She destroyed one galaxy-spanning network only to help build another. But this new system was fundamentally different from the neural web. It was designed to serve its users rather than control them. No single person or species could use it to dominate others. "The morning briefing is ready," announced Jin, Yuki's assistant and one of the many young engineers who had been inspired by her story. The new generation had grown up in the post-Empire galaxy, and they brought fresh ideas about how different species could work together. YUKI nodded and walked to the conference room where representatives from 23 different worlds were waiting. These daily meetings had become a crucial part of managing the Confederation's affairs. Without the instant mental communication that the Vorthok had used, coordination required constant effort and communication. Today's agenda included reports from the outer colonies, trade disputes between mining worlds, and discussions about new exploration missions. But the most important item was a proposal from the Vorthok Rehabilitation Council, the organization that had been working to help the surviving aliens integrate into the new Galactic Society. Chris, former Vorthok noble who had first proposed cooperation with humanity, now served as the Council's primary representative. Over the years, she had proven herself to be genuinely committed to building a better future. Her people had shared their technological knowledge freely, and many former Vorthok citizens had found new roles as teachers, engineers, and scientists. "We have completed the psychological evaluation of the remaining Vorthok population," Kreese reported to the assembled representatives. Of the 47 million survivors, fewer than 2,000 show signs of wanting to restore the old empire. The rest have adapted well to life in the Confederation. This was encouraging news, but Yuki knew that the integration process was far from complete. The Vorthok's psychic abilities had been permanently damaged by the neural web's collapse, leaving many of them struggling with mental health issues. Some had become completely dependent on other species for basic care. The human representative, Admiral Park, raised a concern that had been troubling many Confederation members. What about the war criminals? The tribunals have been going on for 8 years, but there are still thousands of cases pending. This was one of the most difficult issues facing the new civilization. Many Vorthok had committed terrible crimes during the Empire's reign, but determining individual responsibility was complicated. The neural web had influenced the thoughts and actions of every connected Vorthok, making it hard to separate personal choice from systemic manipulation. "We are making progress," Kreese replied carefully. "But we must balance justice with the need for healing. Punishment alone will not undo the damage that was done." Yuki listened to the discussion with mixed feelings. Part of her still felt anger toward the Vorthok for what they had done to Earth and countless other worlds. But she had also seen how their civilization had been as much a victim of the Empire as anyone else. The ordinary Vorthok citizens had been trapped in a system that rewarded cruelty and punished compassion. After the meeting, Yuki walked through the station's commercial district. The sight that greeted her would have been impossible under the old Empire. Humans, Vorthok, and dozens of other species worked side by side in shops, restaurants, and offices. Children of different species played together in the parks, learning. each other's languages and customs, but not everything was perfect. The station's memorial wall served as a constant reminder of the price that had been paid for freedom. Billions of names were inscribed on the crystalline surface, representing those who had died during the Empire's reign and its collapse. Yuki's own parents were among them, killed during the Vorthok invasion of Earth. She often came here to think about the choices she had made and their consequences. The destruction of the neural web had saved countless species from slavery, but it had also caused enormous suffering. Sometimes she wondered if there had been another way, a path that could have achieved freedom without so much death. "You did what was necessary," said a familiar voice behind her. Yuki turned to see Day approaching, his hair now gray, but his eyes still sharp. He had become one of the Confederation's most skilled diplomats, helping to resolve conflicts between different worlds. "The historians are already writing books about what happened," Day continued. "They call it the Great Liberation, but I know you still blame yourself for the casualties." Yuki nodded. "Sometimes I dream about the Vorthok children who died when their worlds lost life support. They were innocent, but my actions killed them just as surely as if I had fired the weapons myself." "And what about the human children who would have died if you had done nothing?" Day asked gently. "What about all the species that would still be slaves if the Empire had continued?" "You cannot save everyone, Yuki. You can only make the best choice available to you with the information you have." This conversation was one they had many times over the years. Yuki knew that Day was right, but emotional knowledge and intellectual understanding were different things. The weight of responsibility never fully disappeared. Their discussion was interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system. "Attention all residents. Long-range sensors have detected an unknown vessel approaching from the Galactic rim. All ships are requested to maintain safe distances until the vessel's intentions can be determined." Yuki and Day exchanged glances. Contact with new species was always exciting, but also dangerous. The galaxy was vast, and there were still many civilizations that had not yet encountered the Confederation. Some were peaceful, but others were hostile to outsiders. They made their way to the station's command center, where Admiral Park was, coordinating the response to the unknown vessel. The ship appeared to be of a design that no one recognized, with unusual energy signatures that suggested advanced technology. "Have they responded to our communications?" Yuki asked. "Not yet," the Admiral replied. "But our translation computers are working on their language. We should have basic communication capability within the hour." When contact was finally established, the results were both surprising and hopeful. The unknown ship belonged to a species called the Meridians, who had been watching the Confederation from a distance for several years. They had been impressed by the peaceful cooperation between former enemies and wanted to explore the possibility of joining the alliance. "We have seen many empires rise and fall," the Meridian captain explained through the translation system, "but we have never seen one collapse and be replaced by something better. Your Confederation offers hope that intelligent species can evolve beyond the need for domination." The Meridians brought with them advanced medical technology that could help treat some of the lingering effects of the neural web's collapse. In exchange, they asked only for the opportunity to learn from the Confederation's experience in building a peaceful multi-species society. As Yuki watched the formal first contact ceremonies, she reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day when she first began her sabotage. The galaxy was still scarred by the Empire's legacy, but it was healing. New alliances were forming, new technologies were being developed, new hope was emerging from the ruins of the old order.